They're all up there again, Miami. They're all up with no safety.
Time runs out. A sack of Jackson. See no turnovers, 3 third-down conversions, 4 penalties, 7 sacks, 9 points, 14 punts, and a partridge in a pear tree. So he would have to come in. Jackson wrapped up back at the 44. First guy there was Adam Butler and a loss of 5. They go there, and it's broken up. It's called a catch and fumble in and out of the hands of Sammy Watkins, and Howard is in for the touchdown.
I mean, they are all these white hats. They're just fast, and they are pursuing, and they're not giving an inch.
Have you ever run the same play in Madden over and over and over again because your opponent, for whatever reason, just can't stop it? Well, that's basically what the Dolphins just did to Baltimore. Believe it or not, the Dolphins lined up pre-snap in a cover zero blitz look, which is a very aggressive look where every single DB is out on an island, there's no safety help deep at all, and you're basically bringing more rushers mathematically than the offense can protect against, so no matter what, you're going to get a free guy off the edge, and you are just surviving as long as you can in man coverage across the board. It's basically the most aggressive look you can think of on defense, and Miami lined up pre-snap in that look 40 times against Baltimore. 40. That's 55% of the Ravens' total snaps for the entire game. I don't even know if I've ever seen that before, but somehow it worked. So here's what we're going to do today. I'm going to show you specifically how the Dolphins like to run cover zero because they do it in a little different way than a lot of other defenses run it, and I happen to like their techniques that they use a lot. And then I'm going to show you how the Ravens tried to answer those cover zero looks and why they mostly failed to do so. Oh, and if you follow me on Twitter and you're wondering if I did find a way to put Old Bay into a cocktail just to make Ravens fans feel better, yes, I somehow did, and yes, it is weirdly delicious. So stick around to the end of the show if you want a recipe for that, and until then, let's dive into this tape. By my count, even though the Dolphins showed cover zero pre-snap on 40 total plays, which is obviously insane, they only actually ran a true cover zero pressure about 34 or 35 times, depending on your definitions for certain things, but that's neither here nor there. Either way, at a minimum, they ran the same blitz at least 34 times. And here is an overview of exactly how that call works. In the secondary, over the top of every single detached receiver in the formation, you're going to see an equal number of DBs in off-coverage technique playing man-match principles. There are no safeties deep at all, which is why they're playing off coverage because they want to keep everything in front of them. Now, they're not in a true locked man coverage or cat coverage as some people call it, they're just matching the releases of all these receivers and playing whoever releases first into their area. This is typically called banjo coverage by the vast majority of coaches, and in banjo coverage, the outside DB is going to take the first outside threat, the apex defender is going to take whoever ends up as the second threat, and the hook player is going to take the final number 3 or the most inside threat. This banjo coverage helps the defense to better handle switch releases from receivers or even little quick hitters against leverage that are almost impossible to stop without basically passing these receivers off to each other. I know that all of this sounds super loose and you're seeing receivers running across the field or deep down the field with tons of green grass around them, but keep in mind that in a zero blitz look, the pressure is designed to get a pass rusher free into the backfield, completely untouched by the way, at virtually 100% success rate. These DBs don't really care about playing tight to these receivers because more often than not, the ball's coming out so quick anyway that the offense can't threaten them vertically, and the offense really only has time to throw stuff like slants or screens or speed outs, so the DBs just have to rally and tackle underneath and just keep everything short of the sticks. Plus, if the quarterback does get frustrated and tries to hold the ball a little bit longer to go deep on them, because again, there's no safety help deep, and he tries to make that throw with a free rusher in his face and zero time to set his feet, well, more often than not, that's going to be a sack anyway before that ball even leaves his hand, so they don't particularly care if you try to beat them over the top, because at least percentage-wise, you're probably not going to hit that throw. Now, beyond the structure of the coverage itself, when we look up front to the line of scrimmage, that's where things get even more interesting to me, because you see all of these bodies up on the line, and you know that every single one of them is a threat to get to the quarterback. Basic pass protection rules dictate that you always want to block the inside threats first, and if you're going to leave anyone unblocked at all, it's going to be the furthest outside threat, because obviously they're going to have a longer way to run to get to the quarterback. So knowing that, what the Dolphins do a lot of the time is they put their safeties as the outside rushing threats, like say Javon Holland for example, because they can still close that ground quickly even when they have to come all the way from a super wide alignment. Now, the one thing that you might also be noticing while watching all of these clips is that some of these rushers on the interior are actually dropping into coverage, and they're leaving offensive linemen literally blocking nobody, and that is completely on purpose. Again, the entire point of putting so many bodies on the line of scrimmage is just to force the offensive line to account for them by rushing to contact and then dropping. They don't need to actually finish the rush because their job is already done and they already forced the offense into leaving a guy completely unblocked off the edge, so that's literally all they have to do. That is their one responsibility, and once the offense commits to them, they can drop back into a short zone and give their DBs a little bit of help against quick slants or under routes or anything else like that. The trigger in terms of knowing who is supposed to drop and who is supposed to keep rushing is actually more simple than you think, because it's just the center and the guard's eyes. All of the interior rushers need to be reading the eyes and looking for a slide in the protection to their side. And the direction of that slide in the protection, either to them or away from them, that is the trigger to either keep rushing or to drop. If the slide is towards their direction, they're going to drop. And if the slide is away, they're going to keep rushing. It really is that simple. From then on, if they're a dropper, all they have to do is just try to get into the throwing lanes on these underneath routes, and usually just their presence in that area of the field is enough to affect the play and to take away whatever Lamar's best option for beating that coverage is underneath. As an aside, I also want to point out that defenders rushing to contact and then dropping is also an effective way to stop the screen game as well, which is usually one of the main answers for a zero blitz, because when you don't have all 6 or all 7 rushers getting sucked way up the field, and you now have a couple guys dropping back, it gives you just enough bodies to close down the inside running lanes on screens that are normally there, and it completely takes away that option as well. So overall, the Dolphins' style of running blitz zero is very sound against a lot of different offensive concepts. You still have that extra free rusher getting forced off the edge just by using pass protection rules and math against the offense. You've got underneath zone help to jam and obstruct under routes behind that pressure, and it's also a lot harder to run screens too because the DBs are all coming downhill from depth and they have a lot of linebackers and defensive linemen already out in space. So it's just really hard to pop a screen against them. On paper, the design of this pressure is fantastic from front to back. It's a very well thought out design, so much so that apparently Miami was able to base out of it for almost an entire football game and still somehow not get burned, which at least to me is extremely impressive. So that is how the Dolphins run blitz zero, or at least it's their style of running blitz zero, and it's probably the safest way to run that kind of aggressive pressure, so for the most part it works really well. However, there also are a few distinct, tried and true ways to beat this style of defense as well. It's absolutely not unbeatable, and there's a reason why the Dolphins aren't the number 1 defense in the league, and they're like 24th in points given up, and they're 3-7. So the obvious question here is, did the Ravens do any of those tried and true methods that beat this style of defense? And if they did do them, why didn't they work? It's a very loaded question, and the answer is kind of a mixed bag, just like most topics that I tackle on this channel. So I'm going to try to do my best to explain the nuances behind whatever it was that we watched last Thursday night. But before I do get into all that, I do want to take a moment to thank my sponsor for this week's show, which you've probably seen them in a lot of my shows this season, and that's Underdog Fantasy. They've been kind of lurking in the back there throughout the season, and that's because I've been partnered with them basically this entire year. If you've watched along on any of my Thursday night streams or follow me on Sundays, you'll see me do these 5-man pick'ems on Underdog literally every single game day, where you just choose unders or overs for whatever players in whatever games that you think are going to have a big day. And then depending on how many players you put into that pick'em slip, the payout can be anywhere from 3-1 to 20-1. So as an example, if you do a $5 slip with 5 players and you hit on all 5 players, you get $100 because it's 20-1 odds. Or if you don't think that you can hit on 5 players all in 1 week, you can just do 2 players and that's still a 3-1 payout. So that same $5 slip would win you $15. And with that $15, you could go, spend it on like a really good free burrito or something. I'm not going to tell you what to spend your money on, but I'd probably use it on a burrito. So if pick'ems sound like a fun way for you to make complete shit shows of games a little bit more interesting, like it certainly did for me last Thursday night. That game was virtually unwatchable, but I had a pick'em going, so it kind of helped a little bit. If you're interested in doing these pick'ems just like I do, you can use my promo code Brett over at Underdog Fantasy, and they will match any deposit you make up to $100. So if you deposit $100, for instance, they will give you another free $100 to use on the platform on pick'ems or really any other contest they run. You can use it however you want to. And at least for me, it helped to make last Thursday night's game a little bit more tolerable to watch. And speaking of that Thursday night game, by the way, why don't we get back into this cover zero pressure, and I'll show you how the Ravens tried to answer it from Miami when they threw it at them, 34, 35 times total in this game. And I'm going to show you why, at least most of the time, their answers didn't really work. What I found most interesting about charting this game was the sheer variety of ways that the Ravens tried to attack these blitz zero looks. I mean, they literally attempted everything. They threw screens, as I mentioned earlier. They ran into it with power and got like 7 or 8 yards, but that was the only time they even tried it. They tried bash counter. They tried to go deep 3 times. It only hit on 1 of them, but it wasn't until super late in the game, so it didn't really matter that much. They did a whole bunch of designed rollouts. They tried optioning off the backside contain player away from the pressure a couple times, which that also didn't work because, let's be honest, Devonta Freeman is not exactly a spring chicken anymore, and he's not going to run away from people the same way that J.K. Dobbins would have if he were healthy. I mean, they did everything from going empty to trying max protection and everything in between, and almost none of it worked. I don't know what was in the Dolphins' smelling salts on the sideline for this game, but I mean, when you watch the tape of this defense, they were all playing like complete fucking lunatics out there. From start to finish, they physically overwhelmed virtually every single player on the Ravens offense, not named Lamar Jackson, Mark Andrews, or Rashad Bateman. Everybody else, though, they just flat out got their ass kicked. They couldn't block anybody on the perimeter, they couldn't hold up versus contact in space and break any tackles, they kept making mistakes in pass protection. I mean, it was truly horrific football to watch. Like, almost as bad as that Steelers vs. Lions game from last week. Obviously, Steelers vs. Lions was worse, but it was pretty damn close, and that's saying a lot. However, even through all of that hopelessness and just straight up bad television, the Ravens did eventually find a couple of answers here, and I think that they're worth pointing out. For starters, one-step bullet slants that crossed the face of these corners ended up being a pretty effective option because the DBs were way too far off to do anything about it, and usually the timing of the route would hit long before the droppers from underneath could get into that window anyway, so that worked rather well for them a few times until Sammy Watkins caught one, and then of course immediately fumbled it to give the Dolphins a return touchdown, but hey, who's counting? Like I said, they got their ass kicked. But an interesting byproduct of those bullet slants being such a threat, especially on the backside of like a 3-by-1 formation where it truly is one-on-one on an island with no help, is that the corner on that backside of the formation would be forced to leverage himself so far to the inside to handle that slant that speed outs to the boundary suddenly became kind of automatic. Towards the end of the game, Lamar started to lean a little bit more on these speed outs, either from an isolated receiver backside or occasionally from 2-by-2 looks, even though those were a little bit more dangerous, and there wasn't really a whole lot that the Dolphins secondary could do about it. Honestly, if they had just done that from the very beginning, instead of constantly trying screens and options and other stuff like that, it's possible that the Dolphins would have backed off of these zero looks and run something else for the rest of the game instead, because at least schematically speaking, any offense is going to get pretty much automatic first downs from that one throw. At least from this alignment, it really is that hard to stop. Last but not least, another option, and rather my favorite option for beating these blitz zero looks that I don't really think the Ravens caught on to until it was way too late, but maybe a future Dolphins opponent will take advantage of it, is that if you know what Miami's rules are for what rush paths they take and the reads that determine who drops and who rushes, you can use those rules against Miami to create some really horrendous matchups for the defense. I'll give you an example. This is from the Ravens' last possession. They're down in the red zone, and I want you to look at this call and the way that it's structured. It's 3 verticals doing a clear out deep for Mark Andrews to get some yards after catch on the under route, and in protection, they're doing a full slide to the left. Remember, no matter what, mathematically speaking, there's going to be a free rusher coming off one of these edges. You're not going to be able to block everybody. So the Ravens are opting to leave Emmanuel Ogbah as the unblocked man. Why are they doing that? Well, because if you look at the end zone angle here, if you full slide to the left towards Adam Butler instead of towards Sam Eguavoen or Brandon Jones, guess what? That means a nose tackle is going to be the underneath zone dropper that has to deal with an under route from a Pro Bowl tight end. And I'll tell you what, I love Adam Butler. He's an amazing football player, one of my favorite defensive linemen in the league that nobody ever talks about. But there's not a defensive coach on earth that wants him to have to try to jam up Mark Andrews in space. That is just not a good matchup. All Lamar Jackson had to do was just fit this ball around Ogbah's arms, and it's a free first down. So really, by using the defense's own rules against them, what this defensive call becomes to Brian Flores and his staff for at least the immediate future is, do you trust your nose tackle to hold up in coverage long enough to get a sack? If your answer is no, then guess what? This call becomes a lot riskier to run going forward. If the Ravens made some of these adjustments earlier and did it in maybe the second quarter instead of the final 5 minutes of the fourth quarter, then we might have had a very different ball game on our hands here. Obviously, I can't guarantee that the result would have been different, but I do think that there was enough tape laid down from just this one game to show that, yes, while this style of defense is incredibly entertaining, it's not completely infallible, and like every other defensive call you can think of, it does have plenty of weaknesses too. Now, as for what this means for Baltimore and for Miami for the rest of the season, most likely it doesn't mean anything, like, at all. And you know what? That's okay, because sometimes it's perfectly fine to appreciate a football game for exactly what it was. This game was just really, really fucking weird, and I think we can just leave it at that. So that's it. That's all I've got on this one. Kind of a weird episode, but yeah. Here's your sexy cocktail B-roll.